Australia made history last week when it became the first country to ban social media for children under the age of 16. Now, all the major social media platforms face millions of dollars in potential fines if they fail to take reasonable steps to prevent children from using their apps. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese welcomed the new law, saying it will be a life changer for both kids and also their parents. But the ban's highly controversial, with some expressing concerns that American lawmakers will be trying to implement similar restrictions. Journalist Taylor Lorenz says the law is already having widespread consequences throughout Australia. Writing for Zeteo, she says countless adults who are unable or unwilling to link their government ID to their online activity or comply with age verification requirements another way, they can't access major social media platforms. Calls to a youth suicide prevention helpline are reportedly up as teens were cut off from their online support networks and also their communities. Kids began downloading unregulated and potentially more dangerous apps en masse, and it was revealed that a primary advocacy group behind the ban's passage was developing an AI tool to track students and was funded and co-staffed by a firm simultaneously making gambling ads. We are joined now on Rising by Taylor Lorenz to discuss her concerns. Taylor, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, our viewers know you and I have debated all sorts of issues and disagree on a lot of things, but I think one of the strengths of Rising is that people on right and left can sometimes agree on things that bipartisan, more middle ground, whatever you want to call them, people think are a good idea. You and I are united on this issue. I think, dramatically ejecting millions of people, worldwide, if this takes hold elsewhere, from access to not just social media in the terms of connections to friends and peer groups, but also just access to information in general, like whether this applies to YouTube, for instance, the platform we're active on now, that my show appears on, and things like that. Suddenly ripping that away from people under the age of 16, that is a dramatic step that was just taken in Australia, and they're talking about doing it here. First Amendment be damned. What are some of the cautionary notes you'd like to sound about that?
First of all, it's not just taking the internet away from millions of people under 16. It's taking it away from millions of adults who don't have a government ID
Right.
ready to go or acceptable. We already have this ridiculous papers, please type culture right now in America where, everybody just wants your ID and citizenship papers every time you step out the house, it seems like, with ICE on the loose. But regardless, there are plenty of reasons that a person might not have an ID or want to provide a government ID before they consume every single piece of information on the internet. For instance, we know that these platforms regularly work with the government. We know that they regularly give data to the government. Meta has turned over messages, for instance, of women in other states traveling to get an abortion in order, where it's criminalized. This is just absurd. And look at what happened with the UK. So in 2023, the United Kingdom passed the Online Safety Act. Now here we have the Kids Online Safety Act. These are essentially almost the same laws. It was the same BS about, protecting kids, da, da, da. You know what we saw? We saw literally countless adults being banned, journalists, activists, other, whistleblowers, other people that are calling out wrongdoing. Look at the content was banned. As you said, Robbie, they're not actually banning content that's dangerous or bad for children. That just means content the government doesn't like. The subreddit for war crimes was banned from adults access to it without providing an ID. Police violence videos, anybody calling out the government or speaking truth to power. It's absurd. And this is just mass government censorship on a scale that we have never seen before. And I think it's just horrific that this is any sort of bipartisan effort. This is completely un-American.
Right. It is so un-American that I think it just straightforwardly violates our First Amendment. I will be interested to see when some of these laws face that kind of scrutiny. I've said this before, but I don't understand how the Supreme Court said that, for instance, the states could not restrict access to violent video games to teenagers. That's a decision for parents and families to make about what is age-appropriate material. If parents want to determine my kids shouldn't have access to this or that, absolutely, I support that. If schools of their own volition want to say these are our cell phone policies, they they're distracting in classrooms, they should be left in lockers. Again, I have no problem with that. I was never making the argument, yeah, force phones or video games on kids at all times to distract them. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
We're just saying those should be individual cases, not made at the level of government, because it's downstream of so many harmful effects.
And I think it's just so disturbing that the government is increasingly shaping our information environment. A lot of people, a common refrain you hear is, "Oh, well, when you go to buy, adult material at the store, you have to show your ID." First of all, you don't have to show your ID to walk into a store,
Hmm.
which is what you're gonna have to do now. That ID is not cataloged, taken and cataloged forever, and then monetized through various databases. Also, that government ID is not tied to every single book that ever check out and every single like piece of content that you read. It's a level of surveillance that frankly doesn't exist in the IRL offline world for good reason. So it's absolutely nothing like showing an ID at a liquor store. And the only reason that we have these comparisons between social media and things like alcohol and drugs, which by the way is a classic moral panic line, as you said, it was we had a video game moral panic. We had a Walkman moral panic, like comic books nonsense. They always compare it to these illicit substances. It's simply not that. This is access to information. I'm not arguing that these companies are all, fun and games and stuff. I think they do a lot of harmful practices that frankly could be mitigated by passing things like comprehensive data privacy reform, which is not even on the table, which would make it harder for these platforms to target young people, et cetera. Instead, we're doing the opposite. We're saying, hey, remember Mark Zuckerberg when we hauled you in front of Congress and said that you collect way too much data and there was that whole Cambridge Analytica scandal? Now we're mandating that you collect more. And actually, you can just go ahead and harvest, biometric data on children. And if you don't want to do it, you can use one of these shady third-party tools that constantly gets hacked. By the way, all of this data is all going to end up exposed. Like because we have no data privacy. So it's just the whole thing is just ridiculous.
Right. The companies are moving toward, the social media companies are moving toward more encryption of their messaging apps precisely because I think they don't want to be in the position where where the public is outraged that they're giving information to the government on one hand, and the government is forcing them to give that information or is going to hurt them or damage them in some way. I mean, I end up, maybe this is just me, in some cases feeling a little bit of sympathy for these the social media heads and tech people who get hauled before Congress, you're right, screamed at from both sides of the political spectrum for not being able to perfectly manage contradictory expectations in terms of safety and security on one hand and data privacy on the other. And they're going to say, well, to hell with you people, then we're just going to encrypt everything. You won't know anything. So stop yelling at us.
I know. But yeah, I mean, the unfortunate reality is that these are still companies that are going to act in their best interest. And so they end up pushing, for instance, Meta came up with the App Store Accountability Act, which just actually mandates even more widespread age verification and identity verification on the device level. That's really harmful. So we don't want any of this stuff. I don't care what these lobbying groups are doing with each other. Tech obviously has a massive amount of lobbying power in DC. The point is, we just don't want any of these laws. And I'm not super sympathetic to any company that much because here's the thing: none of these policies are really going to target their business models like either. That's the other thing. They've wanted to collect more data for years. Meta and YouTube are already pre-complying with these laws because they're like, oh, okay. Censorship doesn't actually hurt their business model that much. And I made a video about this last week, but when you look at a country like China, which by the way, okay, there's a lot of good things about China. Yeah, they have some nice healthcare. Okay, people have houses. We don't want China's internet. Okay,
No.
we don't want that sort of authoritarian top-down control of the internet. But the
1000%.
tech companies there could like it's not like they don't have tech companies with mass surveillance. Mass surveillance laws actually just help tech companies. So this idea that we're going to pass these mass surveillance and censorship laws, which is what these laws are, and it's going to like crack down on the tech companies. No, it's not. They're just going to collect more and more and more data. And you're right, they're going to encrypt messages. But then you have something like the EU's chat control comes, which by the way is downstream of all of this, where they say actually we're getting rid of end-to-end encryption and actually have to start moderating your text messages as well. Moderation. We have to make sure that it's not harmful content that you're texting someone.
Yeah.
That's like literally, that's downstream of all of this, which is you see this happening in the EU now, and it's going to happen to us.
Yeah, the EU and China are unfortunately providing two different, like ideologically different, but in the end, very similar models of what a kind of hardcore authoritarian regime and then a softer, friendly, liberal authoritarian regime can end up in these same positions where they're collecting more of your information, they are controlling more of your access to what you see. And again, if we're for free speech, as so many people on the left have long said, and now some people on the right have claimed when they were the ones being censored. At least you can argue that maybe it was not some principled stand, but they've said we're against censorship. Left has always said we're against censorship. I think they've fallen down in some ways, but these people who say we're against censorship, well, if you believe that, censorship is bad because free speech is good and allowing different perspectives is good, and that is how we become more educated. We listen to all sides and we reject false ideas, not all the time, but on balance, we arrive at better truth. That's the moral, ideological reason to not have censorship. If you believe in all of that, I don't know how you can't then be horrified at efforts to give the government more power to restrict what young people, and not like 5-year-olds, but people who are learning about civics and science and literature and forming their ideas about what the world should look like, and saying we're going to put hard constraints, government constraints, not even your family deciding, but government deciding what you get to see, and not be. Why are people on the left who are against censorship and people on the right who claim they're against censorship not rising up against that ridiculous idea?
It is so hard to get people to care about this, Robbie. As you know, I am out here every single week on my YouTube channel. I have a series called Free Speech Friday where I talk about these issues. I think that, listen, there's tons of people on the right that are just massive hypocrites. We see this with like the Charlie Kirk meme stuff, trying to get people fired, this nonsense. I think a lot of people on the right have authoritarian tendencies around speech, aside from the libertarians, which I think have been principled on this. On the left, they do too. On the left, no one seems to care. They don't care. I mean, you would think these leftists that spend all day, claiming that they care about women's rights, gay rights, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, well now, reproductive justice content and LGBTQ content is about to be mass censored off the internet. Do you want to say anything about that? No, they're busy covering, whatever nonsense, weird stuff that they're talking about this week. Like it just, I don't think a lot of people actually care about speech and free speech online. And we've gotten to such a terrifying point because not only do we have this package of 18 child safety bills in the House, which is obscene, and everybody should call the House Energy and Commerce Committee, every single member, and call your own reps and tell them, we don't want any of these. We don't want the Screen Act. We don't want the App Store Accountability Act. We don't want we don't want COSA. We don't want any of these laws. But now we have the Democrats saying that, they're moving to repeal Section 230. For people who don't know, Section 230 it essentially protects free speech online by ensuring that we have user-generated content online, that these platforms are not liable directly. Of course, they're liable if they break the law. To say that they're not completely liable is misleading. But basically, hey, if you, Robbie, go online and say something bad, I should sue you, the one that said something bad, right? Not like the internet
Not
itself
Facebook,
or some
not X,
infrastructure,
not
some
YouTube, right.
forum.
Yeah.
Yeah, some forum that you posted on to get it shut down. If we remove Section 230, the entire internet dies. That there is no internet. It just becomes like Netflix or something where everything has to be pre-approved by censors or government. It's crazy. And that's what the Democrats want to do. The Democrats have been just so aggressively pro-censorship. I just have to say one more thing, which is I think I've told this story many times now, but I was at this White House Content Creator Summit last August that Joe Biden held right before leaving office. I don't even know if he knew what room he was in, but Neera Tanden, who was one of his senior advisors, got up on stage in front of all these content creators and were like, don't you hate these internet trolls? We're going to remove anonymity from the web. Raise your hand if you want to remove anonymity from the web, remove anonymity from the internet. And all these stupid content creators are like, yeah, me, I want to do that. And I'm just like, oh, you guys, do you have two brain cells to rub together? Like, we're about to lose free speech in this country and on the internet, which is, I would argue, free speech like on the internet is the internet's the most powerful political tool of our time. And there's no pushback from the right or the left.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand Section 230, but if it was gone, they would understand how important it was then. The internet itself would cease to function. You think we have censorship problems now? Wait till you see what happens when YouTube and X and Meta have to pre-approve all posts for liability reasons before they go up on the site, that would be the end of this era of fairly and historically untethered free speech. That would be the greatest silencing in the history of our lives. A terrible idea that has way too much bipartisan support. Taylor Lorenz, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.